Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book. And before we get started with tonight's event, I just wanted to give everybody kind of a quick update of what's going on with us at the store. We are still doing in-store and virtual events now. We're doing a good mix of both. So if you were on the Murder by the Book website, you'll see things listed as either in-store or virtual. We're not quite at the point to, we were just talking about this before we went live. We're not quite at the point where we're doing hybrid live streaming the in-store stuff yet, because it's still just an extra step that we haven't quite figured out. But we hope that you will come see us if you've got an author that's coming through that you're excited about. We hope you'll come see them. Next up in store, we've got Patricia Briggs tomorrow night. Jeff Abbott's going to be with us on Friday night. And we've got Taylor Moore with us on Saturday afternoon at 3. We are also doing an event with Novel Suspects. They're a great crime fiction blog. And next Thursday, we'll be doing a virtual event with them. And they're going to be, it's Women in Crime Fiction. And it's going to be Amina Akhtar, May Cobb, Rachel Halzel Hall, and Elizabeth Hand. And that's actually going to be a crowdcast event. So it won't be here on Facebook and YouTube. So that one you can register if you just go to Murder by the Book website, you will see that. Also, I wanted to mention before we bring everybody out tonight, we do have signed book plates and release swag to go with Fleur's new book. So if you have not ordered your copy yet, we've got signed book plates to go with it. And also wanted to mention that Jennifer Chambliss Bertman is not going to be joining us this evening. She was under the weather, so she is not going to be here. But tonight, we're super excited to be celebrating the release of Daybreak on Raven Island. So I'm going to start bringing our authors out and get us started. I'm going to start with Jennifer J. Chow. How are you tonight, Jennifer?
I am good. Thanks for having us.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
So Jennifer is the Lefty Award-nominated author of The Sassy Cat Mysteries and the LA Night Market Mysteries. The first in the Sassy Cat series, Mimi Lee Gets a Clue, was selected as an Overdrive recommended read, a Pop Sugar Best Summer Beach Read, and one of BuzzFeed's top 5 books by AAPI authors. She currently serves as Vice President of the National Board of Sisters in Crime and is an active member of Crime Writers of Color and Mystery Writers of America. Her newest release was Death by Bubble Tea, which is the first in the LA Night Market series. If you guys don't know, we have a subscription box at the store for cozies, and I loved Jennifer's book, so it was our July pick for the cozy of the month. I'll drop a link for more information if you guys are interested in those. Next up, I'm going to bring out Bryan Patrick Avery. How are you tonight, Bryan?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Bryan is a chief technologist and systems development director from Silicon Valley. He's also an award-winning poet and author of multiple children's books, including the Freeman Field Photograph and the chapter book series, Mr. Grizley's Class. His most recent... I did not scroll down far enough. There we go. He just had a new one, Rama's Gift, come out in the series that came out on August 1st. And so we'll get to hear a little bit more about that in just a bit. And next up, I'm going to bring out Fleur Bradley. Her newest book, Daybreak on Raven Island, just came out today. Hello, Fleur. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. And so great to be here among friends. It's really best way to celebrate.
So Fleur is an active member of SCBWI and MWA, where she is judge for the Edgars. She regularly does school and Skype visits, as well as librarian and educator conference talks on teaching reluctant readers. Originally from the Netherlands, she now lives in Colorado, not too far from the historic and haunted Stanley Hotel, which partly inspired the manuscript of her other book, Midnight at the Barclay Hotel. While the authors are chatting this evening, if you have questions for any of them about their newest book, their previous books, anything like that, you can post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will get to them in a little bit. And I'll also drop a link to the event page where you can order books if you have not yet. But before I disappear and let you guys get into it, Fleur, can you tell everybody kind of the elevator pitch for the new book?
Absolutely. So really, it's the way I try to explain it is Midnight at the Barclay Hotel was a bit Agatha Christie for kids. This Daybreak on Raven Island, my next book, my book that just came out, is more of the Alfred Hitchcock for kids. So this is definitely a scarier book. Would be great to follow on Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, and that's kind of how I intended it. So it's 3 kids going on a field trip with their class. to the haunted and abandoned prison island of Raven Island. Um, and when they get there, they miss the ferry back, which means they have to spend a night on this a very scary island with the abandoned prison, a morgue, a cemetery, a lighthouse. It's sort of your perfect mix of all the scary things on one island. They're not friends, so they're three sort of unlikely kids that have to get along for the night. And that's kind of the book in a nutshell. So I'm hoping that if you are young at heart, you'll read it, or if you have kids in your life, that you'll consider buying it for them.
Perfect. And I will vouch, as she said, if you are young at heart, I've read both of them and I love them. So I love reading Little Great Mysteries. So if you have not picked them up yet, y'all are in for a treat. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Fleur, and I will see you in just a little bit with some crowd questions.
Thank you. So what I really wanted for this event was, because Midnight at the Barclay Hotel has been such a success, and it's been largely because of all my friends and everyone supporting me. I wanted today to be just a fun celebration, like as if it's a party. I even have a cupcake behind me, so I'm ready. But I'm hoping that I can talk a little bit to both you, Jennifer and Bryan, and that maybe if you have any questions for me about the book, that you sort of throw it at me, and then I'd also love to ask you some about your own books.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I have one if I can go first. So I am, and I may have told you this before, but I've always been a huge Hardy Boys fan. And one of the things, and this just the nerd in me, that I loved about the Hardy Boys was that it switched perspectives as you went from chapter to chapter, which you did for your book as well. And I wondered sort of how you decided that's how you wanted to tell the story, and how did you go about making that work as you laid out the story?
Yeah, it is actually pretty hard to do that. I won't lie, as a writer, just to keep that to create an intimacy with three different kid characters. But it's what's nice about that is that it allows me to have very different perspectives. So I have kids from different backgrounds, kids that have a different look at things. So one of the kid characters, her name is Tori, and she's kind of angry. She got kicked off the soccer team, and her brother's in prison, so she's sad about that. One of the characters, Noah, he lost his mom, so he's kind of struggling with that. He's a loner. He's just new to the school, so he's still trying to make friends. And then Marvin, he really just wants to make a movie, so he's kind of the troublemaker a little bit in the bunch, in the sense that he's like, let's go, and the other two are a little bit less excited to be there. So yes, it's really fun because you get to explore all these different characters with different things that they're dealing with, which is good for books for kids, because I think it's important for them to see those kinds of struggles, and that, hey, maybe if I'm struggling with something like that, maybe I'm seeing it on the page. I can sort of relate to all these different characters. So that's the fun part about the writing. The hard part is to try to make sure that they're still all relatable characters. But it's a lot of fun to switch between the perspectives, because it allows you to sort of, show the situation from a different perspective. Like if I'm kind of a scaredy cat myself. So if you put me in an abandoned prison, I'd be more like Noah, where I'd be afraid of a lot of stuff. Whereas Marvin, my other kid character, would have more fun and sees more opportunity. So it allows me also to sort of explore different sides of myself, and to kind of push the boundaries a little bit.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I had a question about the inspiration. So I'm from California. I live in LA right now, but I've been to Alcatraz, and so I just want to hear more about inspiration and like the research behind the book.
So for Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, that was inspired by the Stanley Hotel. So setting is huge for me, because it allows you to kind of make that its own character, and it's just so much fun. And then you can do research, and in my case, I kind of create my own version of whatever it is I'm researching. So when that book wrapped up, it was time to write a new book, and I had sort of inched into kind of spooky character territory. which I had not really planned, if I'm honest. I had only, the Berkeley Hotel is only a little bit spooky, but now it was like, okay, let's go full on scary. And what's the scariest place I can think of? And that was Alcatraz. And I thought, that place just has so much history, so much lore. Just there's that famous prison escape of these three inmates that may or may not have made it off the island and were never seen again. So it was taking that bit, so combined the history plus just a location. That was a lot of fun. And then I made my own island. I literally sit down when I work on these books. I'm like, I'm going to draw a map, because in my opinion, anything is good if there's a map. If there's going to be a map, it's going to be a good story. So plus it's also goes back a bit to my previous books, where I sometimes had trouble within my story keeping track of where my characters were. So I've had to learn to literally draw a map of where everyone is at any given time. My editor sort of told me, well, this is what you should probably do that, which was great advice, because now I use that for all my books. I start off with a map and I think, what is the scariest thing I can think of? Because I'm, as I said, kind of a chicken, so I don't really do scary stuff very well. So that's just a lot of fun to do that. So that's how that started. I've never been to Alcatraz. I still have yet to go someday, hopefully. But the research is it's a scary place, and aside from sort of the exciting part, it's also a kind of a sad place. So that was the other thing that kind of came out of that. Yeah.
So speaking of prison being a sad place, one of the things I thought you did, and I spent 10 years working with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation here. Actually, I designed the prison system that they use to manage all the prisons in the state.
Oh, wow.
And so I've had an opportunity to see from the inside of prisons what prisons are like. And it's not good. And I think you do a really wonderful job, particularly through Tori and her experience with her brother, in terms of bringing some of that to light and bringing issues with prisons, and particularly the privatization of prisons and all of that to light. What kind of research did you do? I know you have some back matter in your author's note where you kind of talk about that, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of where that came for you and how that research came about.
When I write, as far as my books for kids, I try to really focus on making them fun for kids. That's all I care about. I'm not really very good at, or I don't consider myself an author of books that have difficult issues in them. But this was one I couldn't avoid. When I started researching Alcatraz, I'm like, okay, I'm right there. And I'm discussing some of this through Tori. I can't not discuss the problem of incarceration in America. Yet, I'm writing this for 8-year-olds, so that was really difficult. And my editor and I went back and forth quite a bit on this, as far as what is okay and what is not. Sometimes, if like, for instance, I spend a lot of time talking to kids, so I kind of know, they're showing me their cats and their little baby sister, and they're asking me what I like for dinner and what my favorite food is. So I have to bring that something that is this big down to the kid level, and that was really difficult. I did a ton of research that never made it into the book. I watched the 13, some documentaries that are really eye-opening. I think if you get a chance to see some of those, that's definitely good material to kind of give you a very raw look at what's happening. For me, it kind of brought it down. What brought it down to reality was the statistic of 1 in 28 kids has a parent in the system, which I'm thinking to myself, that I can understand, because that's one kid in every classroom. And I talk to classrooms all the time. I do some school visits. So I'm literally looking at those kids. So one of those kids is probably keeping that a secret, So that's kind of how I thought, okay, that I can translate into a book and into something that, could maybe just shed a tiny light on what that might feel like for kids, because I can't change, the what's terrible about the system. This isn't the book for it or the audience for it. At the same time, I wanted to say something about it because it was just too much to avoid. So it was definitely a bit of a balancing act. It's one of those cases where you do a mountain of research and then you use nothing of it, basically, other than just a feeling that you have at the end of it of sort of wanting to do something, but only being able to drop little nuggets into the book because that's just what made, what was reasonable. But
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I had a question too about you're talking about writing and the writing process, and you did this lovely post on this guest blog that I'm a part of, Chicks on the Case, and you talked about this being your pandemic book. So I kind of wanted maybe just to share about like what was that process like, and then the parallels between kind of like how you're feeling and then how that sort of translated into some of the book.
Yeah. So we're all still trying to figure out how we feel still, I think.
Right.
I do, about what happened and what's still going on, and just how it impacts you as a person. And for writers, we have to dig deep and we have to really go down to our hearts in order to write a good book. And there are always huge parts of yourself in a book. And with Daybreak on Raven Island, it really was, I really, every time I set out, I'm like, I'm going to write a fun book for kids, and it's going to be on Alcatraz. It's going to be so cool. It's going to be spooky, mystery. Yay. And then you start writing it. And then it wasn't until after the fact that I realized my theme is loneliness. My theme is being alone or feeling isolated with whatever problem you're walking around with and not feeling like anybody understands what it is that you're going through. And I'm thinking to myself later, like, this was why I wrote that, is because it was a very lonely time. I mean, we were all looking at each other just as we are right now, but it still feels really removed, and it doesn't feel very personal. And it's still, at that, once the computer goes off and the day ends, it was still a very isolating time. So if this was my book that kind of talked about that in a different way than I had intended, because the pandemic is not really part of the book, but that feeling of being alone and being isolated. And then on the flip side, what works for the kids is what worked for me, is to reach out and talk about how I felt. So I'm hoping that with Daybreak on Raven Island, that the kids that read it that maybe struggle with certain things feel comfortable enough to talk to someone about it, to not feel alone, because it stinks to be alone. And it's especially for kids trying to still, I'm sure, figure out also how they're feeling about everything. I'm hoping that this book, and just in general, that we can have conversations about this sort of stuff, and even things that we think no one else is feeling. Surprise, we're all feeling very similar things, because it's all really hard. So yeah, that was definitely, this book was sort of my pandemic book in a lot of different ways.
That's cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think we've all sort of written things over the past couple of years where we look back later and go, oh, yeah, I got it. That's why I did that.
Yes.
No, I feel like that.
Right. That's where that came from. Oh, yeah. And it's a lot of time after the fact and later, which is how it should be. And I'm grateful just to have been able to write a book, because it's been such a challenging time, sometimes to be creative, and it does require a lot of yourself and of your soul and of your whole self. So, yeah, absolutely.
So you said you set out to write a spooky, fun kind of story. How do you keep it spooky and fun?
And it's a bit of a balancing act. I try, because I am myself not all that, I horror, which sounds like a heavy word for, spooky is lighter, of course, but really what it is horror. And I've never been all that much into scary movies, horror, or anything. So I've sort of figured that I'm a good baseline as far as keeping it safe and not making it so scary that kids can't read it. Because I know a lot of author friends who write for kids who write far scarier things than I do. So I try to keep it kind of, environmental scary stuff and the forest and stuff that I would find scary. I tried to put in there, but then at the same time also creating a little bit of levity around some of it. But it is definitely challenging because I'm first and foremost a mystery writer. That's just sort of how I look at myself, and that's where I come from. So the mystery part usually comes easy. The scary stuff part, I kind of have to dig deep. And it does help a lot to have a setting that kind of creates that, where, if you start off with a very scary island with a bunch of spooky stuff and ghosts and things, then that's a good jumping off point. I will say horror and mystery are kind of like cousins. They're you have always an element of mystery in that scary story. And as far as Daybreak on Raven Island, it was fun to sort of come up with all this backstory that was behind these legends and ghosts and the why of them haunting Raven Island. So yeah, it's fun, but it is a challenge definitely to balance the not so scary with the very scary, pushing the boundaries of it.
Great.
Yeah. So, now I'm hoping that you both will talk briefly about your own books, because that was the idea behind this, is that you each have an opportunity to also, because I admire you both greatly for the work that you do. And I'd love to hear more about your books, and I love both of your books. So anyway, I'll let Bryan go first, and maybe you can talk about what you've written.
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of all over the place as a writer. In fact, I'm actually doing a workshop in September where I talk about writing across multiple genres, because I write picture books and chapter books in middle grade, and I write fiction and nonfiction. So I have a series called Mr. Grizley's Class. And so every time I get with an author, I ask questions about characters, which is why I'm quizzing you about it. Because when I signed the contract, 2 years ago now, to start the series, the first thing I had to do was come up with a classroom of 20 students. And they all had to be different, obviously. And it was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of work. I mean, it was, in some respects, it was more work than writing the individual books. Because each book centers on a specific student. And so it's been a lot of fun to do it. And I get to tell a lot of different stories from a lot of different perspectives. But that first step of creating 20 characters that you could build stories around for the next 4 or 5 years was a big challenge for me. So I'm really proud of that series because it features a very diverse class of students, which was very important to me because that was not an experience I had. I went to a school where my brother and I were the only 2 students of color in a school of 350 students. And so I kind of created the class I wanted out of that. So it was a lot of fun, and it's been fun to share that and to talk with kids because they all kind of say, hey, this is me in the book. And there's a lot of different shared experiences, kind of like you talked about, where kids can look at this and say, oh, you know what? I was a new kid like Mordecai, and that was my experience. And they feel kind of more open to talking about it. I've also written a few mysteries. And so I had 2 that came out this year, one called Off Base and one called Soccer Suspicions, which was a lot of fun for me because the 2 things I read a lot of as a kid were mysteries and sports books. And so I got to kind of combine the 2 of those. And so that was a great deal of fun. And then this month in Black History Month, I released a book called Black Men in Science, which was a labor of love. And boy, was it a labor. But it was also a lot of fun. And I was really, really proud of the final result. It took a lot of research and it took a lot of work to get there. But it highlights 10 Black scientists going back 200 years in the United States of America. And I'm really, really glad I did it, because one of the first statements I get from a lot of students, and even from some parents when I go out and talk with schools or do virtual visits, is, I didn't realize there were Black doctors in the 1800s. I didn't know any of this. And so I'm really glad that the book is out there and it's available for people, so they can kind of see things that they may not necessarily know, and it's a chance to learn new things. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love. I'm constantly recommending Black Men in Science, because there's so many pictures on my feed, and they don't. There's not a lot of books like that out there, and there's just a real need and an interest in it. So that's fabulous. How do you do all that? That's a lot of books. I'm tired just listening to it.
Well, I told you I was taking this week off until I heard from my editor today. So you talk about Daybreak on Raven Island being your pandemic book. These are kind of my pandemic books. I haven't been able to go anywhere or do much, and I love to write. I love to tell stories, and so this was a way I just kind of dove in and spent the time doing it. It is a lot of work. I mean, there are times where I'm just like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" But it's worth it. As I'm sure you both know, when you get out and you meet with readers and talk with them, the hard work is worth it.
Yeah. Excellent. It sounds like a lot of really fun passion projects. That's really great.
Yeah, it's cool. I think that's a part of how I stay focused, is it has to be stuff that I love and that I enjoy. And I find ways to make it fun. A number of the kids in Mr. Grizley's class are named after my young cousins and other people in the family. I named 2 of the characters after my parents. And so actually Bobby's story, which came out in August, is named, my dad's name is Bob. And so it was named after him. I named him Bobby Lewis, which is his first and middle name. And then there's another character in there named Annie, which is my mother's middle name. And so I do things like that, and it makes me smile while I write. And so it keeps me at the writing table writing.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun. So how about you, Jennifer? I'm knee deep in Death by Bubble Tea. I love this book.
Oh,
new series. Everyone needs to buy it. Yes. So talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I write cozy mysteries, which are kind of comfy reads that are just whodunits. And I think someone called Death by Bubble Tea like an adult Nancy Drew or something like that, but with food maybe. And so that's what I usually write. And my previous series was called the Sassy Cat Mysteries. Then it has a telepathic sassy cat paired with a pet groomer protagonist who solves cases, right? And so what's great about these books too is they're adult cozy mysteries, but I think kids can actually read them. Sometimes there is some intergenerational readings going on, which I love, because then the family can read together. And one of my kids actually had the first book, Mimi Gets a Clue, in the Sassy Cat series, and that was like sort of their like book club read for the like little reading club. So that was kind of neat. And then this new one is a new series called LA Night Market Mysteries, and it's a lot of fun to write, just because I'm a foodie and I have like a food background. I grew up in a family restaurant, so we kind of bring a lot of that into it. The 2 main characters are cousins, and they're a little bit kind of like those friends you're talking about in your book, Fleur, that are like, they're all different, but it's like different but in a family, right? So they have like opposite personalities. Yale, who's a narrator, she's like bookish and reserved. And then you have Celine, who's like opposite, extroverted and like flashy, and is just loves technology and is going for like her gram, the foodstagram, So she always has her phone on her. And I think it's a lot of fun writing those characters, and they're like thrown together, not on an island, but they're thrown together running a food stall at this local night market. And of course, it's not just like they have to run a food stall, but one of their customers winds up dead. So they have to like figure out like what really happened, because the police are kind of looking at them and thinking like, wait a minute, and this is one of your customers. So I don't know. So it was really neat to write. And it was also written, I think, in a time like, I don't know if it's a pandemic book, but there are definitely like themes of main characters like example, kind of deals with like the grief of losing her mom. And so there are a little bit of those kind of like darker threads in it, maybe because I was writing like during this time. But overall, it is a lighthearted, fun mystery read. And as a cozy, sometimes I have stuff in the back of the book. And so this one has like includes recipes in the back of the book because it has recipes in the back. So
That's I love it. It's so fun, and I hope there will be more in the series because it's my escape at the end of the day right now.
there's at least a book 2 coming out in next spring called Hot Pot Murder.
Oh, I think I thought I'd go buy that. Oh, yay! That makes me happy because then I'll get to read that. So
Thanks.
yes.
Well, speaking of food, I did have a food question for you. What is that cupcake you have? What kind of cupcake did you bring to celebrate?
Okay, so yes, I did. Look, it's Devil's Food with a cream cheese frosting on the inside. I did not make it. The people at my grocery store did, thankfully. So yes, I'm going to be having that in a little bit because it kind of became that was another pandemic result a little bit. Both my adult daughters were living with us from back from college and just finishing up high school. So they were, we had really a house full of 4 people, adults, that during the, year and a half that we were all sort of stuck at home, we were all stuck together. And one of the things that my daughters did, which was really nice, was they were like, we're celebrating everything. So anytime there was any reason to celebrate anything, we're like, cake. It's not good for your waistline. Thankfully, we were walking a dog, so it isn't so bad. But that was a way for us to sort of go, hey, celebrate every little accomplishment, everything that is good, because things were so hard. So now I'm the cake lady on Twitter because I'm forever like, hey, cake, because I think that's such they've flown to coop now. My daughter, one of them still lives at home, but the other one left. And that has been such a great thing, is to just sort of stop and take a moment and go, hey, we did something cool here, whatever it was. So yes, that's why there is always cake here in the house. I should start my cake shop. So I should really start baking some more. But yes, so that's been a great celebration. And I got some fake ravens around me for when I do author visits with the kids soon. So that will be fun. And that was another fun thing actually that came out of the book, which is a complete segue about nothing. But ravens can communicate with each other, and they can make sounds that sound like actual people, which I thought was, when you start to do research and you're like, oh, this is so cool, I'm going to use that in my book. So that was one of the things I used in Daybreak on Raven Island, because I'm like, ravens are really kind of cool birds, even though they can be a little terrifying and everything, but they just have a lot of cool stuff going on too. So that's why the ravens in the background. So, yes. Lots of good stuff.
There aren't a lot of animals that creep me out, but ravens, because of the talking thing, they've always creeped me out.
They're a little too smart for birds, right?
Yeah. And they're organized too. They move like and so I feel like we can't trust the ravens.
Yes. And a group of raven is called an unkindness, so that should tell you something. See, I'm that person at the cocktail party that has all the weird factoids. I'm totally that person because I do all the research for everything. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Even though you can't really use it in a book, or it doesn't really, amount to anything other than something being sort of interesting. Like a murder of crows. It's an unkindness of ravens. So yes, lots of interesting stuff. So what's next? What's going on with both of you? Bryan, what you're working on this chapter book series? Are they all going to come out?
They'll all be out next year, sometime next year. So that's fun. And then I have actually 2 picture books that I'm basically done with. I got the last of the past pages, I think last month. And so those come out early next year. And they were really fun. They're animals. And so I got to do some morphism and all of that. which I've not done before, but which I've always really loved. And there's about social emotional learning, which is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So it was a lot of fun, with things like respecting diversity and working together and different things like that. So that's that, and just a lot of writing.
Yes, sounds like it. You must be busy too, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have the next book coming out, like I said, in spring, Hot Pot Murder. And then my agent is shopping a new series, which is it's still a cozy mystery series, but it's got like a touch of magical realism.
Oh.
And food.
Oh, yeah, food is good.
Of course.
It's
So
fun.
we'll see. Stay tuned.
Yes.
So what about you, Fleur? What are you working on?
Mm-hmm.
I am working on 2 different projects. Another middle grade. This one is also going to be kind of a scary, spooky, but another mystery, because I just love mysteries. Mysteries will always be my thing. And then a YA mystery as well. So I've got both of those going back and forth. I'm hoping to finish those by the end of the year, so they can maybe go out into the world on submission and try to find a home somewhere. So yeah, that's in the pipeline for me. So fun writing, but then at the same time, like, oh, I need to, do all the fun book launch stuff. So that's been a good diversion to go back and forth, because I'm in great awe of you, Bryan, to be able to juggle all these projects, because I thought it would be easier, but I'm finding that to be quite challenging to work on 2 things at the same time.
Yeah, I have to almost physically separate the work sometimes, where I'm like, okay, I'm working on this, and then I will stop, and I'll actually I'll go to another room. So where I'm sitting right now is where I do most of my writing, but I edit and different things like that in other rooms in the house. And so it's sort of weird. Like I'm wandering the house with my Surface tablet, and like, what are you doing? But it helps me to just sort of be like, this is my writing spot. I edit downstairs and all of that. So I can at least mentally kind of take a break from whatever I was working on at this desk and focus on something else.
I always have, if I'm working on one thing, the other thing looks shinier.
Right.
That's very true.
So hard. Ooh, but that idea, I bet I could do better with that. So, but I've done the same, where I'll sit in a different chair, or I'll sit in a different spot, and I print out my work as well, and then sometimes take it with me if I'm going somewhere, and just kind of sit somewhere different and mark it up.
Mm-hmm. So. Same. Sit in different places, or I'll write longhand, or sometimes I'll just move the chair so it feels like a different spot. Maybe psychologically convince myself.
So it's funny you say that. Fleur has probably seen before. Usually when I'm sitting at my desk, there are books behind me.
Yeah.
There aren't anymore, because I went to the extreme, and I've actually rearranged the entire loft. Oh. And I didn't think about the fact that the bookcases are now over there. And was like, well, so now I'm like, oh, I should move it back. But I kind of like this. I needed a break to sort of say, okay, time to move everything around. And so I've reorganized everything.
Yeah, I have the same. I've been relocating because, kids in the house, kids not in the house, office, no office. I've worked, honestly, just about everywhere. And it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's nice to have an office. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to be able to just sit down, especially for school visits, just to have a background that makes sense. But yeah, it's good to move around every once in a while.
Yeah, you have to do what you have to do, I guess. And I'm in awe of you too, Fleur, because you're juggling also that YA and middle grade. That sounds like a lot too.
It is. Well, and they're in both at the same stages, which is it. A lot of time you both know it's you'll have one where you're drafting and one where you're getting markup back from your editor. It's not like that, and they're both basically at the same level. Like I'm editing now and polishing, and so that takes a different sort of mental space. It's kind of fun to be in that drafting point where you're just sort of imagining all the new world you're creating. So I'm kind of at that hard part now where you're running the marathon where you're 9 miles instead of 10 miles or whatever. So yeah, it's fun though. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this. So, and glad to be here today with both of you. together. So I don't think there are any questions in the chat, or if there are, I missed them.
There are a few. Before we get to those, I also wanted to mention, as we said when we got started, Jennifer Chambliss Bertman couldn't join us tonight. But I also wanted to mention that her book, Sisterhood of Sleuths, is going to be out in October, and it's a great kind of homage to Nancy Drew. So I'm going to drop a link to that in the comments too, in case anybody wants to check that.
I'll say I got an early read of that book, and I highly recommend it, especially since we're here among mystery fans. You're going to like that book a lot, Sisterhood of Sleuths. So check that out. Yeah.
So, Fleur, Robert said that he loved the activity in the educator guide for the book for kids to draw their own maps. So how did the educator guide come to be? I know when we were introducing and mentioned your bio that you work with kids about reaching readers. So did you have any input with the educator guide?
Oh, yeah, I created the educator guide. I do pretty much most of the things, the extra activities that you see. And part of that comes from... I homeschooled my kids for a while, so I kind of became a bit of an expert in reaching reluctant readers because my youngest daughter has trouble reading. So she's not quite dyslexic, but has a reading disability. So I kind of have to teach her way through that. So stemming from that background, my passion is really trying to reach reluctant readers. I do educator talks about that subject on how, sort of stepping stones one can use. And I, as a bonus, because I'm pretty much up to date on all those things and what's right for the age group. And I also write some educational books as well for middle grade. I'm up to date basically on all the standards. So yes, I wrote the educator guide, which I'm hoping that teachers will be able to use. And then the extra activities are kind of there, for fun, because I love, like I said, the whole map stuff. I'm like, oh, this would be fun. And maybe kids can make their own maps of their own stories. So, yeah.
And I love, Jennifer, I love that you mentioned that your cozies also work well for young readers. I love being able to introduce kids that are potentially ready for more adult reading level, but not necessarily adult content, to give them cozies. We actually had a kid come in today who was maybe 8, and he had watched Murder on the Orient Express and loved it. And so we were looking at other middle grade stuff, and his mom was like, he really likes stuff with murder in it. And I was like, which is, he was in the right place, but, it's tricky with middle grade stuff because usually the kids aren't solving a murder. They're, something's gone missing or it's a heist or it's some sort of adventure. So Fleur, it was great to be able to have Midnight at the Barclay Hotel because they're like, yes, they're actually trying to solve a murder in this one.
Yes.
Yes.
But then Jennifer, she said, the mom said, well, also, do you potentially have anything that's a cozy mystery that we could potentially use? So it's nice to have those as good bridge books for kids that are kind of starting to come around to mysteries. Jennifer, so you mentioned that speaking of things in backs of books like educator guides, you mentioned being a foodie and there being recipes in the back of the book. So are those recipes that you came up with on your own? Where did those come from?
I mean, sort of, in that they're recipes for things that, I eat. And so I kind of tweak it. I blogged about the salad that there's cucumber salad, spicy cucumber salad. And I've had it before, but I made it again because I had my dad staying here for some health issues, and he really likes spicy. And so I was like, I gotta make something for him. So I ended up just kind of trying to figure out and then tweak it a little to make it work, and also work for both our taste buds, since I'm not as accustomed to spice as he is.
And so, Bryan, we've been talking about the middle grade series that you got, the Mr. Grizley's class, but then you've also done nonfiction stuff like the Black Men in Science. When you're approaching something that's fiction versus nonfiction, do you approach them differently as you're starting out the process?
Not really. I'm a plotter. I'm not that much of a plotter. I know, like I heard once, David Baldacci writes like a book length outline for his books before he starts writing. So I don't go that far, but I still sort of plot everything out, and I try to break them down. I think, Fleur, you use the same sort of break it into 4 pieces. And that's what I do even with my nonfiction. And so every biography that's in Black Men in Science was written that way. I actually broke it into 4 sections and then figured out what to tell in each of those 4 sections. And so for me, the approach is the same. What is different, obviously, is the research. I still do research for my fiction books, but obviously on the nonfiction side, because all of that has to be factual, there's a lot more research involved. But in terms of laying out the story and telling the story, I usually use the same process.
So Robert just asked Bryan, he said, what scientist story interested you the most when you were researching?
Oh, wow. So there were a couple that I was fascinated with. I think the one that I liked the most was, okay, so there are too many. It was an emotional book for me, and so one of the challenges that I had writing it was that I really struggled with what could these men have done if they hadn't had to overcome all of these other obstacles. And so Dr. Boucher, who's in the book, one of the things they talk about, I talk about in the book, and in all of the research I did, they talk about is they weren't able to find any of his papers, any documents, anything he wrote, which is really weird for a man who was a PhD and a professor. And it was a very sort of strange thing. And so he was fascinating to me because as a mystery writer, I was trying to figure out, well, what happened to it? And I've actually plotted a book where some kids try to figure out what's happened to these writings as a result of that. And so that was really fascinating to me. The other one was Charles Henry Turner, who got a PhD, but no university would hire him to teach. So he actually taught at a high school. But at the high school, he did all of the research he would have been doing at a university level, but he did it without assistance and without the financial aid that would have come from working in a university setting. And he created scientific apparatus. He made huge discoveries of all of those things from a little lab in a high school. And so that story really fascinated me because it showed, the resiliency. But like I said, I struggle telling people that story. And in fact, I have to force myself to tell it when I talk to kids because I get emotional about it, because I just think, imagine if he'd had the resources he should have had, what he would have been able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That has to be the case for all the men in that in that book. So
And so Bryan, you just touched on this, but this will be for everybody. We'll start with Bryan and see if you have anything to add to it. So Spooky Middle Grade is watching. They want to know, do you ever find yourself trying to solve mysteries in real life?
I sat on a jury once. And so actually I'll go back. So in high school, I was in my high school's production of 12 Angry Men. And I played number 4. And if you're familiar with the play, that's the guy who realizes that the woman who was the eyewitness wore glasses and she wouldn't have been wearing them in bed. And so I sat on this jury, and it was really hard not to sit there thinking, this is ridiculous. And I mean, there are all these clues. And I had kind of decided that the kids who reported, what it was is some kids working at a gas station got robbed, and they blamed it on a local homeless man. And so the police found the man 5 minutes later. He had none of the money. He had no weapon. I mean, all of these things. And so I'm sitting there, I'm listening to this, and I'm like, this story doesn't make sense. And so for the rest of the trial, I'm like, well, what really happened? And so I still tell people to this day, I'm like, I think those kids did it. So yeah. And so I have that problem a lot. I'm working on it. I've been working on it for a long time. And
like a Mystery Writers Anonymous group for people.
How about you, Fleur? Are you ever trying to solve mysteries in real life?
I'm more of a mystery gatherer. I love sort of mysteries that were never solved. I know that sounds kind of strange, but in Daybreak on Raven Island, I used this prison escape by these three men, and no one knows what happened. And I think it's sort of cool that no one knows what happened, which I shouldn't, but it's one of those things where I'm like, you know what, you're not meant to know, and there's some clues or just some evidence, but a lot of it is sort of flaky, and people start to look for evidence when there isn't any. And so I'm more of the school of, oh, that's interesting, that's about it. I don't need to solve it. I think I would make a terrible detective for that reason.
And how about you, Jennifer?
Oh, I don't. Maybe like little mysteries that I like solving, like, oh, this thing disappeared. What could have gone? But not like murder. Like in the books, I think I would try to run the other way. I do like solving mysteries in books and movies, but then I like stay quiet because I don't want to like ruin it for the people around me.
See, I'm the one who ruins it for everyone. No one wants to sit with me. I'm like, it's that guy, at the beginning, and my daughter will be sitting next to me going, and a lot of time I'm right, but this has more to do with it's easy to spot the placement of a certain person, and it's not necessarily that I know. And sometimes I'm wrong, which is cool when I'm wrong. I like it when I'm wrong, but I ruin it for everyone.
How about you, Brian? Are you a ruin it for everybody, or are you a keep it to yourself?
I am not a ruin it for everybody, but I will tell you, my wife, she will walk into the room while I'm watching something, like Law and Order will be on or something. She'll watch for 30 seconds and she'll be like, it was him. And then she'll just walk out. And the maddening thing about it is she's almost always right. It's like,
All right. So I think our last question before we head out tonight, we're going to start with Fleur on this one. What is something that you've read lately that you've loved?
So that would be Jennifer Chambliss Bertman's book, Sisterhood of Sleuths. I just love that book. It's basically an homage to Nancy Drew. It's of this girl who's finds kind of starts to dig into the lore of Nancy Drew and what are the books really about, and what's the backstory of the writers of Nancy Drew, and just what is truth and what is not. And it just hits that middle grade audience perfectly. Plus I learned a ton about Nancy Drew, which I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in the Netherlands, and Nancy Drew was not a huge thing, and at least not on my library shelf. So I didn't really get to know Nancy Drew until I came to the US. So for me it's a fascinating look into something that a lot of people, the first thing when I tell them I write mysteries for kids, the first thing they say, oh, Nancy Drew. And I'm sometimes frustrated because there's just so much great stuff being published now that I think is better than Nancy Drew, if I'm honest. But I also understand that this is something that is sort of like something that people grew up with, and that's part of them in the way that you were talking about the Hardy Boys. It's like that, so I get it. And this book is great to kind of get to my point now. Sisterhood of Sleuths. If you can get a chance to check it out, this is a great book that really looks at it in a contemporary light, which was so great for me to understand it a little bit better.
Awesome. And how about you, Jennifer?
I'm trying to think. Let's see. For younger readers, this is more YA, but there's like a YA sort of rom-com by Suzanne Park called The Christmas Clash that's coming out, and it has like these two rival people in a suburban mall, and their parents own these rival like restaurants in the food court, right? And so that was kind of a fun read to kind of revisit that, all the mall vibes, the Orange Julius and all these references, and just have that that fun like enemies or frenemies vibe. And then I think, let's see, for mysteries, I haven't read it, but I'm looking forward to Valerie Burns' book.
It's so good.
Oh, really?
It's so good. It's one of my favorite. It's called 2 Parts Murder, 1 Part Sugar. It's one of my favorite cozies that I've read. in a while. It's so good.
Oh, good.
And how about you, Bryan?
Well, Daybreak on Raven Island. I
Right.
loved it. And I say that because, so Fleur knows this. So last year I was on the Edgar committee for YA. And so I read a lot of YA books, but I read them sort of analyzing them a lot. And so it's been a while since I sat and just gotten lost in a book. But I got lost in Daybreak on Raven Island. I really, really loved it. And so if you're into mysteries, if you're into things that are creepy, this is a great book.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Perfect. So to recap for anyone who might have joined us late, we have been celebrating Fleur Bradley's newest book, Daybreak on Raven Island. We've been chatting with Jennifer J. Chow and Bryan Patrick Avery. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, you can go back and rewatch it on both Facebook and YouTube. I've dropped links to the books that we've been talking about that they've read lately, their newest releases, so they're all in the comments on YouTube and the live chat on Facebook. You can also see we were able to chat with Elizabeth Bunce and Fleur not that long ago when Elizabeth's newest book came out. So if you're looking for some more middle grade chat, that's up there. We've also chatted with Jennifer at least maybe a couple times, I think, throughout the pandemic about her other books as well. So those are all up on the Facebook and YouTube channel if you guys want to check those out. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And
Thanks,
Fleur,
Congratulations, Fleur.
yeah, congratulations. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.